Hello everybody, my name is Adam Thorne and welcome to the Jake Nelson Experience, the podcast where we talk about creatures in the vents, kittens that fly in the sky and all manner of witty plays on words. It is my privilege to introduce the man that's been promoted from co-host to star of the show. Jake Nelson, it's an honour and a privilege. How are you?
Please, Adam. I put my pants on just like everyone else, one leg at a time. Except once I've put my pants on, I make excellent podcasts.
Now, I've been considering whether or not to bring up this anecdote, which I haven't shared with you previously, but I have been concerned personally that the show has gone on so many tangents that it's now no longer about aviation, and I've been worried that the senior management at Momentum Media that own Australian Aviation could get worried about this. I would have thought I could be dragged into a room and told, you know, Adam, we're going to have to rein this in. The other day, I was standing at the lifts and I bumped into Alex, who's one of the founders of the company. And he's like, oh, Adam, how are you, etc., etc. And then he said, oh, I've been listening to the Australian Aviation podcast. I was like, all right. And he's like, been listening to Jake. And I was like, here we go. I'm in a world of trouble here. So I was like, yeah, no, he's a character, isn't he? And in my head, I'm getting ready. It's coming in, and I'm getting ready. In my head, I'm going to be like, look, I've tried my best to rein him in. I'll do all I can, you know. And I was, you know, he is what it is. And then he turned around and he went, love the show. And you know what? Jake is fantastic. He is so good. And I was like, obviously, well, you know, I put him up to it all, you know, all my idea. But no, that is a joke. But it transpires, Jake, the powers that be, senior management, they love the show and they love you.
Frankly, I'm as surprised as you are,
I
Adam.
was shocked too. But so whatever it is you're doing, keep doing it, basically. It is a ratings winner.
I'm in danger of taking this as a challenge, Adam, if I'm being honest. We have had some nice feedback as well from there was one listener, N. Antoine 12111.
Great name.
Hi, Adam and Jake. I religiously listen to your podcast every Wednesday. I work for Airbus on the A350, so keeping up with Australian aviation news is most relevant. Hint, hint. Please continue with the great lame jokes and insightful industry analysis too, of course, in that order.
People love it. Clearly, people love it. That's what I'm like. We're just going to go with this. We're going to let this show go in whatever direction it needs to go in. We are not joined, however, by our sometimes co-host Ben, who apparently is ill. He's ill.
Look, that's the cover story,
Adam. That's the cover story. But where else could he be?
He is. We strongly suspect he is in the clutches of Enoch, our rarely seen producer, in his dread talons, perhaps. Now, we did actually send a drone up into the vents to look for Ben and for Enoch's lair. But when we found the drone, it was smashed to pieces and bleeding. Weirdly, I didn't think drones could bleed, but apparently they can, or at least they can once they've been in contact with Enoch. So it's quite disturbing, if I'm being honest.
I actually haven't seen or heard of Ben in 2 weeks. I don't know if you've.
Sometimes you do hear the occasional noise from somewhere in the vents, but we can't be certain whether that is Ben or whether it's Enoch imitating Ben to try and lure in more prey.
Well, if we do get any updates on Ben's whereabouts, we will let you know. Or if you are a sales professional looking to move into the aerospace industry, it looks likely we've got a position imminently set to become available.
Quite possibly. Speaking of good feedback, we've received some lovely feedback on the Australian Aviation magazine from Mark over in Perth. He said, hi, Jake. Please note Adam, who I emailed renew aircraft deliveries previously, has been excluded this time. So everything's coming up Millhouse, I guess. Have read the very good article you wrote re Melbourne ATC, particularly interested in the topic as a mate here in Perth was an ATC in Perth controlling the Port Hedland Alice Springs sector, later chose not to relocate to Melbourne as technology started replacing staff. The technology side of it interested me greatly too, in particular the ITAS section and reference to virtual towers. He said, keep up the great work. So thank you, Mark from Perth. Well, Mark is a great fan of ours and a long-time reader of Australian aviation, I believe. So, Mark, if you're listening, thank you for the lovely feedback. We're always glad to see people are enjoying the magazine.
We are, and I must say, until recently, until perhaps you took a more prominent role in this show, all I ever got was not so much negative feedback, but just pure, unmitigated hatred from a small band of people. But now it's all good news. People are happy, bosses are happy, readers are happy, everyone loves it. Smiles on faces. That's why I got into this business.
And Mark has, of course, sent us some lovely feedback on the most recent article before. I don't recall if we noted on the podcast the other week, but he said, in general, he really liked the last edition of Australian Aviation. He said it's top shelf aviation journalism, content and presentation, a great range and selection of articles with depth and balance, in particular examining the aircraft on order, the Great Southern Cross, ATC Ops, and the change scene with Bonza up and running. To you and the team, well done and keep up the great work.
Thank you very much.
We love you too, Mark.
Yes, and I was going to say you should go on the Australian Aviation website, australianaviation.com.au, where you can find out more information about subscribing to the magazine, which you can get both digitally and in print. Don't take our word for how good it is. Take Mark's word.
Take Mark's word.
Take Mark's word.
And don't forget, you can also now find Australian Aviation as well on Threads and Blue Sky. We have launched those two new platforms for Australian Aviation on social media as of last week. So on Threads, you can find us at Aust Aviation HQ. So AUST Aviation HQ. That is the same as our Instagram because Threads is basically Instagram. And on Blue Sky, you can find us at australianaviation.com.au. And there you can keep up with the latest aviation news and insights. If you are not on Twitter or no longer on Twitter, or if Twitter is currently on fire.
Well, yeah, it's a shame because I know you're a huge fan personally of Elon Musk, the now owner of Twitter, aren't you? You're big. I'm surprised you diversified away.
He is an incredible man, and I say that in a pejorative sense. He is an awe-inspiring figure, and I say that because he inspires awe at just how terrible every decision he makes is.
Okay. Right, now, let's actually talk about the aviation news.
Oh, that's what we're here for.
Well, technically.
Yeah, that explains the screens.
Technically, yes. We will get new logos. We'll get the Jake Nelson Experience logos created.
There we go. There's something new for the screens.
Yeah. Okay, let's steam into the aviation news. Now, the story that I picked out today that I got very excited about, I think I got more excited about the story than Jake, is that the RAAF have released this new kind of incredible TV advert. Essentially, it's like one of these Christopher Nolan films. It's like Inception and Batman and Dunkirk, and it's astonishing production values. And obviously, this comes kind of in the middle of reports that all of defence, along with a lot of industries, have got a bit of a talent shortage. Jake, tell us a little bit more about this.
Yeah, so it's this multimedia sort of cross-media campaign. It's got TV, cinema, radio, out of home, digital and socials, all of those, and it's really sort of pushing this idea that the Air Force is not just about being a fighter pilot. Or being a pilot in general, though they certainly do need people for those roles. But, technical fields, mechanics, electronic and cyber warfare, space, all of these other fields that the RAAF is involved with. So Matt Keir, the Minister for Defence Personnel and Veterans Affairs, over the weekend in Perth said that the Air Force is quite successful in its recruitment endeavours. He said, but the areas we really need to focus on are around those engineering roles, those intelligence, cyber warfare, electronic warfare roles, and also this new space domain that are so critical now to the work that we do. They're the areas we're focused on growing. He says, what we see with the focus on technological roles in our Defence Force is it reflects what we're seeing across broader society. We need people that have got good STEM skills to come into our defense force. And so this is sort of the background behind this campaign. Up there is kind of the tagline of it. There's all sorts of different RAAF aircraft that are featured in the campaign. You've got the F-35A Lightning IIs, the FA-18F Super Hornet jets, E-7A Wedgetail, C-17A Globemaster Heavy Airlifter. There is actually airborne scenes that were, for the first time, like this is new technology being used in Australia, high definition gimbal cameras that have been placed aboard an L-39 jet to record a lot of these airborne scenes. And so it is very impressive, very cinematic, as you say, Adam. It could be a movie trailer.
It's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. And so in my last job many moons ago, I worked for a website that basically reported on the media and marketing industry. And so as part of that, I watched far too many Australian TV adverts. This is genuinely one of the best ones I've ever seen. It's really, really, really clever. And what I like about it, just to go back a little bit, a couple of issues ago in the magazine, we reported on the Gold Coast Air Show, and the Gold Coast Pacific Air Show. And one of the points they were trying to push is that aviation has actually become not so much uncool, but it's been pushed out of the mainstream among young people. It's not as cool as perhaps it used to be, 3 or 4 decades ago. And one of the things I was told when I interviewed one of the kind of key figures there was, you go along to traditional air shows, you see a lot of older men. You don't see many women. You don't necessarily see enough young people other than perhaps really young kids. And that's one of the reasons you've got a bit of a talent shortage. It's one of the reasons you're struggling to get people in, because aviation is not seen as being cool. And so one of the things the Pacific Air Show has tried to do is to try to make it cool, to make it for young adults and for kids, to give it a kind of a lifestyle element, to add music and entertainment in as well, and to actually make the shows themselves a lot more engaging. And what I liked about this advert is it's kind of tackling that head on. So again, it's the way it's been shot, the dramatic way it's been shot. You've got lots of pretty young people. You've got this one point where you've got like an F-35 reflected in somebody's kind of eye, and it's just brilliant. It's presenting this as a very, very exciting profession, and the kind of a tagline or the kind of the brand platform of the silly marketing jargon is this update idea that kind of up there anything is possible. Up there the rules don't
This
apply.
is where your potential is.
Yeah, exactly. And so rather than it being about here's some old-fashioned looking airplanes, basically, it's saying this is the most exciting thing ever. And it brings to mind when I've spoken to kind of a lot of plane spotters, and when people ask me, what is it that motivates people to take pictures of planes all the time? And I say to them, when they look up at the sky, they don't just see a plane. They see a miracle of science. They see one of the greatest, inventions man's ever produced. They see the hopes and dreams of the people on that aircraft, all the journeys, etc.
It takes you back to when I spoke to Jeb Brooks, the YouTuber, last year. Hello, Jeb, if you're listening. When I spoke to Jeb Brooks, he talked about how amazing it was that you can, step in a door and like a few hours later step out that same door and be somewhere else in the world entirely. How he had always appreciated the miracle of flight, and that was what partially spurred him to become an aviation YouTuber, which he's made a very successful career out of. If you haven't listened to that podcast from last year, very, 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 very interesting podcast, very entertaining. Jeb, lovely guy, and we would like to have him back on the show anytime that he would like to come on. So Jeb, if you're listening, drop us an email.
That's it. I think if you want to cover aviation properly, you have to understand the romance of it. And one of the things I've kind of always said is it's the most exciting thing about aviation isn't the aircraft, it's the people, it's the stories, it's the romance. And that's what I really, really like about the campaign. It's really tapped into that.
Look at the Ron Twine, his name was, the Air New Zealand flight attendant who we spoke to. He'd spent 50 years or something with Air New Zealand, and he'd seen how the industry had evolved over that time, and had all these amazing stories from his time in the skies.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the same thing when we had Chris on the show, and you say, why did you get involved in aviation? Because he saw the aircraft in the skies when he was younger, and he sort of fell in love with the romance of it. But credit to, obviously it was created by an ad agency, but it's done in conjunction with Defence. Credit for them to doing something quite different. I think they did a similar ad about a year ago, but it was nowhere near as good as this. Credit them for doing something different. This is going to be rolled out across. It's going to be in TV. It's going to be in cinema. It's going to be on all the social media and websites, etc. I think this is really good. Defence have got a problem with recruiting people, and they're actually doing a really clever and good thing to tackle that issue.
Yeah, a really good time for Defence to be doing this because they heard Senate estimates last month. Angus Campbell, the chief of the ADF, General Angus Campbell, told Senate estimates that overall Defence was about 4,300 people short of its authorised strength. And there was News Corp saw these internal defence minutes in October that said that future milestones for trained F-35A pilots are trending below planned numbers. So, they said that there's workforce attraction, generation, and retention challenges. Most of the F-35A workforce has successfully transitioned from the classic Hornet, but there are still shortages across technical support and pilot workforces. So it's not a moment too soon, I think, for the RAAF to be having an ad like this that can really sell people on the excitement of a career in the Air Force.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. It's like, particularly just take a number of professions, but say we look at pilots. If you want to be an F-35 pilot, it's not just that they need enough applicants. You've got to be very, very, very good to get in that cockpit, and you need to have enough people that you can wheedle out those that aren't good enough, because the series of challenges and the series of tests they've got to go through is very, very high. Similarly with things like engineers. Engineers are a very, very high skilled profession. You can't just sort of take anyone. You need people that have done their time, that know their stuff, that are willing to travel around the world. So that's why you need this big pipeline of people. So I do think doing something like that is a really, really good start.
And especially considering as well, there's, a broader talent shortage across the aviation industry. They're short on pilots, they're short on engineers. There was, a lot of ink and pixels spilled last year about staff shortages in air services for air traffic controllers. Air services has been, doing major sort of recruitment over the past year and a bit. Possibly longer than that, and when I went to the Air Services Melbourne facility, I saw some of the training processes that these ATCs had to go through, and we spoke to a trainee air traffic controller and learned about what's it like. It seems like a very interesting profession. It'd have to be an interesting profession, and so all of these different sectors of the aviation industry are needing people. Younger people to choose aviation as a career, be that as a pilot or an engineer or an air traffic controller or whatever else.
Exactly. Well, no, keep up the good work. And I'm very intrigued to see where they can take this campaign next. Right, let's move on to another story, which is actually quite a big story. We've been talking on this show. We've almost sort of predicted something here. We've been saying that one of the big stories of this year is going to be a shortage of aircraft, basically getting hold of new ones. And this essentially is a hangover from COVID and supply chain problems of perhaps people in the industry. Too many people taking early retirement, too many people leaving. Obviously, you've had a war in Ukraine, you've got trouble in the Middle East. All of these things add to prices, add to shortage of equipment, etc. That's meant now that airlines are going to struggle to get hold of new aircraft. This is particularly a problem in Australia because we basically have a very old fleet across Qantas and Virgin. We are still running on the kind of old generation 737s when the rest of the world moved on an awful lot.
And A330s and things like that.
So you've got Qantas now and Virgin kind of scrambling to get these orders in, having to fight against other airlines. And the irony is during COVID, being able to buy an aircraft or lease an aircraft was dirt cheap because you have the balance of power. Now it's going to become more and more difficult. And as Australia faces this shortage, it's going to be more and more difficult to get the planes they need. We had an announcement from Virgin earlier this week. Tell us a bit more.
Yeah, so this was not so much an announcement as kind of acknowledgement that Virgin, we're all aware of the recent difficulties at Boeing, which, started up again after the blowout of the Alaska Airlines emergency exit door on the emergency exit door plug on the 737 MAX 9 over Portland. the FAA has sort of barred Boeing from expanding its MAX production, at least for the time being. And, all these troubles at Boeing have had the knock-on effect that Virgin Australia, which has an order of, quite a few of the 737 MAX family, so it's got 10 more Maxes on order, with 10 more Max 8s on order and 25 Max 10s. These Max 8s were all supposed to arrive by the end of this year, with the Max 10s to start arriving from 2025. But the Max 10 still hasn't been certified in the US by the FAA. And now, as well, because of all these troubles at Boeing, Virgin has basically been forced to admit that it's not going to get all of its Max 8s by the end of the year. It's expecting only 4 more Max 8s from its order of 14, meaning the remaining 6 will start arriving from early next year. Meanwhile, the Max 10s, which were supposed to arrive starting next year, will now not arrive until 2026 at the earliest.
So there's a few issues with this. Obviously, firstly, you want to get a new aircraft because the older an aircraft gets, the more maintenance it takes. Just like with a car, people say, how long does an aircraft last? Well, as long as you want. But the older it gets, the more you've got to patch it up, the more checks it's got to go through, etc., etc.
It's also less fuel efficient.
Exactly.
It's noisier.
Well, yeah, this is it. We'll get into that. Right? So, yes, the first thing is it's more fuel efficient. So, 20% or so more fuel efficient than the older generation ones. So obviously you effectively as an airline can make more money on that. But if you have got an order in for this many aircraft, if you're doing your forward projections financially, not getting these aircraft in is going to cost you more money in the long run. It's also important for Virgin because basically, post-COVID, they've effectively stopped being a traditional international airline. But having the MAX, which has a slightly longer range, does enable Virgin to start to and to expand on kind of limited. They're kind of like the shortest of long-haul routes, but it does stop them really getting back into limited operations or makes it an awful lot harder for them. So the longer it takes these aircraft to arrive, the more problems they're going to have.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Virgin Australia right now, aside from the 4 737 MAX 8s that it now has, it received its 4th MAX 8 VH8ID on the 13th of March. It has 4 MAX 8s. Basically, the rest of its fleet is 737-800s. There's, for VARA, there's a couple of 700s and like a couple of A320s, and, those old Fokker 100s that are still flying out west for, VARA. But the rest of it is basically all 737-800s. And, you order the 737 MAX 8 because it's basically the 737-800 again. That's why you would order, there's not a lot more training needed. The 737-800 is a popular design. And so it's, again, it's just the same plane again, but a little bit more this time. And so Virgin has basically gone to an all 737 fleet. It's just the one aircraft type, again, barring those couple out in Western Australia for VARA. And so if you're running just all 737s, you want to have a bunch of reliable 737s. And if you're looking to replace your older 737s, then when the new 737s get delayed, as you say, Adam, you're stuck using the older ones for a little while longer.
Yeah, exactly. And again, it might sound obvious when you explain it, but if you say, for example, are a pilot, it's not the case that you can fly a 737 and then the next week just jump into another aircraft type. Obviously, you have a whole series of training and licenses and qualifications you have to get. Same for all sectors that work there. So one of the ways that Virgin believed they could be more efficient and cost effective was to move to everything being a 737 fleet. That is part of the reason why, unlike Qantas, they didn't move into buying Airbus aircraft.
Dreamliners.
Dreamliners, exactly. So they decided the best thing is purely to be well in with Boeing. Now they have been punished for that. So if you're Boeing, you're going to be quite red-faced. Virgin will be quite upset about this. So that is, another issue they're going to face.
And this is after Virgin increased its order of the 737 MAX 8.
Yes.
Because in November, it was originally just supposed to get 8 MAX 8s. Now it's got 14 on order. So Virgin has, put more of its chips into Boeing. and is basically being whacked for that.
Yeah, exactly. Now, obviously, we don't know exactly what commercial discussions would have happened when they signed the deal to get these Maxes. But without a doubt, if you're Jane Helitka and you're flying over doing this deal, she would have asked the question: are you absolutely certain that these things are going to arrive on time? And they would have been reassured, absolutely no problem at all. But the problem is Boeing potentially weren't to know of all the problems they've had earlier this year, alongside all of the issues from COVID. So now they've been left very red-faced. It's a very difficult problem.
And in the latest issue of the Australian Aviation magazine, you can see a bit of analysis on the Boeing situation, particularly surrounding the MAX. I spoke to a professor at, I believe, RMIT. I'd have to go back and check. It's been a while, and it's been a long day, Adam. And
it has been a long day.
But I spoke to a very astute professor who kind of took us through what the challenges Boeing is facing now with the 737 MAX. Can people have confidence in Boeing? What can Boeing do to dig itself out of this hole? And so check that out in the latest issue of Australian Aviation magazine, where you will also find an opinion piece from me about the Boeing situation, where I give my opinion of exactly what's wrong with Boeing and how they can fix it.
Maybe the magazine will also be called the Jake Nelson Experience next issue as well. You know, like how Taylor Swift will have like a Taylor Swift magazine.
Yeah,
it's just the Jake Nelson Experience.
What would my Eras tour look like, Adam?
I don't know. Probably, I would say slightly smaller venues.
Probably, yes.
Slightly smaller venues.
Yeah.
And then you can build up from there.
By the way, just briefly on the subject of Virgin Australia Regional Airlines, we haven't touched on this before, but VARA is looking to replace its remaining 4 Fokker F100s, which are about 30 years old by now. It's kept those on to land at smaller regional airports that can't handle a 737-700. Which is what it's been using now in place of most of its former F-100 fleet. Virgin is looking to retire those 4 remaining F-100s and replace them with either the Airbus A220-100 or the Embraer E190-E2, which is the successor to the original E190 E-Jet. The E190 E2 possibly got a little bit of a leg up this month when Embraer announced that it has received 120-minute ETOPS approval, which will basically allow it to fly longer, more direct, non-limiting routes over water and other remote areas. So we don't see that. I think there's only one E2 currently active in Australia. That's with Pioneer.
That is a great knowledge. I've got to say, I know it is the Jake Nelson Experience, but that is what you get from Jake Nelson. Deep jokes and detail, attention to detail. I love that.
It's what I do, Adam. I pun and I know things. But yes, there's I think only one E2 that's currently in use in Australia, though Pioneer might be looking to get rid of that one. But it's the E2 and the A220 are sort of the main options for Virgin at the moment for replacing those Fokker F100s. And so it's. Now that the E2 has been given this extra approval, that is probably going to make it it's probably going to raise its standing in the stakes between it and the A220. From what I've been reading, the E2 I think doesn't have as much range perhaps as the A220-100. But it's a very comfortable experience, and I believe the quietest aircraft of its type in the skies at the moment.
Very good knowledge. Very good knowledge. Okay, welcome back. So we spoke a little bit there about RAAF's new TV advert and also the problem with aircraft shortages. We're going to move on now to a story that caught my attention, and this is about something called pit-up probe covers. Now, I want to give you the background. So, arguably, the most serious safety incident happened, I think it was in 2018 in Brisbane. And anyway, I'll start at the beginning. Pitot probe covers, which I'd never heard of until a couple of years ago, are effectively the little nodes that stick out from an aircraft and effectively act as the aircraft's speedometer. However, at Brisbane Airport, they've got a problem, unbelievably, with bees. And the bees... Wasps. Not monkeys or chimps. Wasps or bees. Same, yeah. With things flying to get in them. And so the solution, the workaround, is to literally put covers on these Pitot probes. And there was an incident back in 2018 where an aircraft took off with these covers on. The ATSB did a 4-year investigation into how all the checks and balances couldn't identify this issue, because actually when you're in the sky, even though a lot of things are automated, the one thing the pilot really needs to see is the speed. That's obviously vital to taking off and even more vital to landing, etc. So it's one thing that can't go wrong. And did a big investigation into this. We have basically seen a kind of an almost near incident where the aircraft got ready to take off with the covers on. Jake, tell us a little bit more.
This was a Singapore A350-900 in May 2022. The ATSB has, just released its final report into that incident very recently. This was another incident where the Pitot probe covers were being left on. Now, yes, as you say, Adam, the reason that they have to put these covers on the tubes at Brisbane Airport is that there's these invasive mud wasps that like to nest in the tubes and can apparently block them in less than 20 minutes, which is, disturbing. So you put the covers on to prevent the wasps from getting into the tubes, but you have to take them off before you take off. Otherwise, you won't be able to get accurate readings from the probes, and it will give you all sorts of headaches. So this Singapore plane was about to push back when a refueler, I believe, in the next bay noticed that they were still on and alerted the licensed aircraft maintenance engineer, who came back and took them off. This plane was then able to leave for Singapore, which it did without incident.
Which is, to be clear, credit to that person for noticing. But again, the kind of the wider issue here is that this is an issue that kind of keeps on happening. Now, Brisbane Airport, to their credit, this was from quite a while ago, they've actually taken lots of measures to kind of inherently lower the population of flying things, wasps. But obviously that's not an easy thing.
Not planes, obviously.
Not planes, yes, no.
That's the right kind of flying thing to have in an airport. Wasps, the wrong kind. Want to make that perfectly clear.
I do find, and this is not a dig at Brisbane Airport at all, I do find it incredible that the only solution that they could come up with was like, we need to put some covers on it.
It's a simple enough solution.
Yeah, it's a simple solution. But yeah, anyway, that's another story that caught my eye. Moving on to drama at airports, we have had the recently announced strike among aviation rescue firefighters. It's quite a complicated story, and you've got two sides to this story. So, Jake, tell us the latest development, and then kind of both sides of how this is playing out.
So, the United Firefighters Union of Australia, the UFUA, held a ballot over whether aviation rescue firefighters should take protected industrial action. Now, this was particularly relevant because they were sort of threatening to do it over the Easter break, where it would be extremely disruptive. Now, this ballot that they took, at something more than 90% of the firefighters voted in favour of industrial action, but they are not going to be doing it over Easter. So the Easter. The Easter break will be working as normal. This is sort of for potential future industrial action. So if they want to take industrial action now, they've got the vote to do it. Just to note, I believe they, from what we've heard from sources, they didn't specifically vote to not strike over Easter. They just aren't striking over Easter. The vote was just, should we have protected industrial action? That is according to people we have spoken to. Now, the the firefighters say that their demands are minimum international staffing level for safety, better fatigue management, and fair pay rises for emergency workers. They have been, saying for a while, and this was for Wes. This is from Wes Garrett, the Aviation Branch Secretary. He said, right now, some airports around Australia are not meeting the minimum international staffing standards for a safe response to a critical incident. Firefighters are short-staffed, fatigued, and worried, seeing Air Services Australia compromising safe staffing levels and thumbing their nose at the regulator.
So
which is very strong language.
It's very strong language. So what they're effectively saying is their view is we don't have enough staff, therefore we're exhausted and tired. And when you're as exhausted and tired, that's when you miss things. That's when you make a mistake. That's when things go wrong. And therefore not having enough people is potentially endangering the public, because if something goes wrong, they may not be on top.
Yeah, and they've got this this whole campaign 3 minutes to live around the potential dangers of this. Now, on Air Services side, Air Services, not just ATC, not just air traffic management, they are also responsible for the provision of aviation rescue firefighting services at 27 of Australia's busiest airports. Air Services has strongly denied that they have staff shortages. Air Services says it's got more than 830 firefighters, with another 48 expected to join this year. The Air Services is basically saying the UFUA is not really that concerned about safety. They are looking mainly for a 20% pay rise over 3 years. Jason Harfield, the CEO of Air Services, says this would cost the aviation industry and their passengers an additional $128 million. He says, quote, "We have sufficient aviation rescue firefighters to meet our operational requirements, which are monitored and regulated by CASA as the aviation safety regulator." He said, "From the outset of negotiations in October 2023, Air Services has offered our ARFF crews an 11.2% pay rise over 3 years with no change in conditions. However, the UFUA is now seeking to disrupt Australians' Easter holiday plans, including by instructing their members to conduct a go-slow in not guaranteeing response times or even delaying their response to emergency situations involving the travelling public beyond the 3-minute maximum required by safety regulations." So basically what Air Services is saying is this is not about safety, it's all about the money. We can't give them any more money than we are offering.
There's no money left. Now, I should say when we cover this, both on the podcast and when we report it online, we do try to be as impartial as we can, because there are two sides of this story. And again, without wanting to take sides, there is an argument, just talking generally, that, and I've heard this said before, that almost like the last move in any negotiation is to play the safety card, is to say this isn't about money, this is about the fact that if there's not enough staff, we're working harder, we're more exhausted, this could endanger safety. And that's always the last card to play. Now, you would argue that the union are going to obviously lead on that, because if you're a mainstream newspaper in particular, that's how you will cover the story. The kind of the rotten journalists will always go and say, this is terrible, lives are being put on the line. The other side of the story, as Air Services would say, is actually it's just about cold, hard cash. Obviously, it's going to be very interesting to see how this comes about, because clearly if they take a deal which doesn't necessarily equate to a lot more staff but does equate to a lot more money, that undermines their point. But certainly, I don't want to belittle it by saying playing the safety card, but playing the safety card is something I've seen time and time and time again over a number of years. So I do see both sides of this argument.
It is kind of an impasse at the moment, it would seem, between Air Services and the union, because if what Air Services is if we're taking what Air Services is saying as true, and if the union is wanting more money than Air Services is physically able to give, that's a problem.
Yeah, exactly. And in terms as well of these shortages, like as we spoke about before, staff shortages are a problem. Getting people is an issue. More wider kind of apparent staff shortages at Air Services. Air Services has said that, it takes time to get people in. It takes time to train people up. This is not a simple process. And as well, Air Services are effectively a government department. They are effectively controlled, and there is only so much money in the pot, and arguably there's only so much they can do. if you are negotiating with an airline, perhaps there is kind of more money behind the scenes. They only have as much money as they have. And so it's kind of like, how long will this impasse go on? The other option is that, as you kind of alluded to a little bit earlier, is that the union will say, we have taken the decision not to strike over Easter because we don't want to upset the punters. We don't want to disadvantage the traveller. But of course, doing that at Easter would also have brought them a lot of bad publicity, which would have been bad for their cause. Nonetheless, this is going to go ahead after that, we would assume. And all of the different options they've got, one of those options is essentially to down tools for the whole shift. That would inevitably affect airline schedules because they would have to work around that.
Now, they would need to, airlines would need to be given 7 days notice of any industrial action so that they can plan around the periods of industrial action. So it wouldn't necessarily be the case that aircraft would be landing with no fireys to support them if something went wrong. It would be a case of schedules would be disrupted because aircraft cannot land if there's no firefighter support.
Yeah. And we will keep an eye on that story.
Adam, I do think, on a tangential note, that
it's a Jake Nelson experience. You can do what you want. Go on.
Fine. Well, look, I had some ideas for some changes around here. I think you should wear a sillier hat.
Okay.
No,
just a hat. Let's just start with a hat.
A hat, possibly with bells. Now, what I was going to say, Adam, is that I think that the government should also nationalise all the barbershops in the country and call it Hair Services Australia.
Yes, he did say, on that note, actually, when we were sat around the office, and I had a bit of a joke with Jake last week, and it was a little bit of a playful dig, and you came out, you was a real low blow, because I think I said I was insinuating that I was a lot older than you, and you were like, oh, yeah. What was it you said about my hairline? Which I'm very sensitive about.
I did say something about your hairline. I don't recall what the exact context was.
But you were insinuating that it was not what it once used to be, is what you're insinuating.
Yeah, something along those lines.
Yeah, not very nice. Not very nice.
But you should go to Hair Services about it.
Welcome back. Okay, just to wrap up this show, we've got a couple of stories about kind of network changes or about other airlines. And the first one, well, the kind of ongoing story that we've been talking about now for the last kind of year or so is our Bonza going to make a go of it? It's a little bit of background. Bonza effectively fly point-to-point. I should do the pre-recording. Bonza fly point-to-point routes, which means they skip out capital city to capital city flights in order to fly from one smaller holiday destination to another smaller holiday destination. You know what I mean. Anyway.
We'll work on that one.
We'll work on that one. I'm going to get so told off by Jake, the producers of a Jake Nelson experience. They are brutal off air. We are brutal.
I think I can hear Elon. I think I can hear Elon. Oh God, Elon's here too. No, I think I can hear Enoch scuttling it overhead as we speak.
He did actually joke earlier today about beating me to a pulp in the office. That actually happens. That is what I'm facing. Help me, please. I'd rather be eaten by Enoch than deal with this.
Adam, I would never. You would destroy me.
Right, anyway.
You have so many years on me, a lot of extra experience. All the energy that could have gone to maintaining your hairline has gone into building your muscles.
Yes. Bonza released some statistics this week on how successful or not they've been in Rockhampton. Jake, tell us a bit more.
Yeah, so Bonza says that since it started flying to and from Rockhampton on the 13th of March last year, it has flown more than 100,000 people into and out of Rockhampton. Now, what is interesting is that at the 2021 census, Rockhampton had just under 80,000 residents. So effectively, Bonza has had more Rockhampton passengers than the entire population of Rockhampton.
But that's really impressive because either the people of Rockhampton have been having children at an extraordinary rate and they've actually increased their population to such a point. Anyway, but what it means, obviously, is this is good for Rockhampton because they're bringing in tourists, really. They're actually, and this is an example of what Bonza said all along, is that you can have all the number crunches at the major airlines saying it will never work, but it's not until you put the flights on that you will see how successful or not they are. And you could well argue that Bonza, perhaps more than any other airline, it's going to do more to actually help the places they're flying from because these are new routes, these are new options that were not open before, and you can see how in a place like Rockhampton that's really important. What it also shows is if you are able to boost tourism in Rockhampton by as much as they have, the brand sort of affinity there will be very, very strong. And actually, all the routes they fly, people will be quite grateful for Bonza for putting on these options that didn't exist before.
Yeah, so Bonza at the moment flies from Rockhampton to Townsville, Cairns, Gold Coast, Melbourne, and Sunshine Coast. Now, it is ditching the Townsville route at the end of the month due to low demand, but it seems evident that the other routes are still strong enough, at least at the moment, to sustain this significant the significant presence in Rockhampton. And if we just check Rockhampton Airport on the old Wikipedia here,
the very highest sources at the Jake Nelson Experience. I mean, we stop at nothing for accuracy. Go on.
Exactly. Yes. If we check the Wikipedia page for Rockhampton Airport, we can find that Bonza is one of four airlines that serves Rockhampton. So Bonza has services to Cairns, Gold Coast, Melbourne, Sunshine Coast, and Townsville, though Townsville is ending at the end of the month. QantasLink to Brisbane, Cairns, Mackay, and Townsville. Skytrans Airlines to Cairns and Proserpine, and Virgin Australia to Brisbane. So, effectively, Bonza has come in and basically matched QantasLink's the number of destinations you could get by QantasLink. But it's opened up these new destinations as well. So Rockhampton to Cairns was served by QantasLink and Skytrans before this. But Gold Coast, Melbourne, Sunshine Coast were not served by any airline from Rockhampton. So you can now fly directly between Melbourne and Rockhampton, Gold Coast and Rockhampton, Sunshine Coast and Rockhampton, where you could not before, and it's all thanks to Bonza.
Well done, Bonza.
We have been having discussion as well, Adam. You might recall, sort of off screen, about whether Bonza should be looking to diversify its fleet. Because, on the one hand, you have the advantage, if it's all 737 MAX 8s, then you have the advantage of you only need to train your pilots on one aircraft type. On the other hand, if you have smaller aircraft in your fleet, like perhaps the E190, like the E-Jets, or like the A220, you can look at, putting on routes with these smaller sort of 100-seat range aircraft first, and then if the routes prove wildly successful, then you can upgrade them to the 737 MAX 8.
Yeah, exactly. Now, there's no exact science to, they call it like the load factors, right? So there's no exact science to what the percentage is, but generally speaking, you want to be aiming at kind of 75-80% full in order for this to make money. If you have a relatively larger aircraft like the 737 MAX, that means you need to get whatever it is, 170, 180 people on there for this thing to work. But firstly, Bonza are going to have a trouble with getting more Maxes in, which is something we've kind of already seen.
They're dry leasing 2 of their aircraft now from Flair.
Yeah, so they were initially aiming to have a fleet of 10 Maxes by the end of the year. Whether they're going to be able to do that or not, we don't know. Perhaps even they don't know. So in order for Bonza to expand, and Bonza need to expand to get to that break-even point, as we've discussed previously, it may be the case that they have to slightly change their strategy. Now, I think, as you said there before, taking on smaller aircraft is a very smart idea because it will open up so many new routes. And like you said as well, it may not just be the case that you're putting on routes which are sort of less popular. It may be the case that it's a little bit of a tester. Particularly what we saw before, when Bonza started, they started all of this network, they started all these routes, and then sort of half the way or 2/3 of the way through the year, dumped a lot of them that weren't working. It makes
in particular, all of the services to Coffs Harbour, for example.
Yeah, exactly. It makes more sense to use these smaller aircraft to test things out, but it could also be the case that they take smaller aircraft and they could go back to some of the routes that they dumped that weren't economically viable, that then may be economically viable again.
Yeah, so, if the 737 MAX 8 didn't work out going to Coffs Harbour, but you have an E190 E2, there might be enough demand into Coffs Harbour to sustain, 100-seat E190 flights, 100-seat flights on an E-Jet or an A220. And you also... might consider, especially with Coffs Harbour. Tim Jordan, the CEO of Bonza, we had a story last year where he was complaining about the high airfares into Coffs Harbour, on the airlines that fly into Coffs Harbour now, which I think Rex and QantasLink. Bonza had pulled out of Coffs Harbour before then, but now the flights, as seen by Tim Jordan, to Coffs Harbour were very, very expensive. So if Bonza has a smaller plane like an E2 or an A220, and they fly it into Coffs Harbour, then that could be a way to, bring more competition into Coffs Harbour and serve the Coffs Harbour market, because Coffs Harbour have indicated they were very keen to have Bonza back, and Bonza said, we are not shutting the door on Coffs Harbour. If Bonza has smaller planes, then they can serve the, perhaps maybe a lower demand destination in Coffs Harbour or a lower demand route from Coffs Harbour, without having to invest one of their 737 MAX 8s, of which they only have 6.
Well, Jake, as well as working on Australian aviation, he does the Jake Nelson experience. I'm a Jake Nelson consultancy. So, Tim, if you are listening and you do fancy working with the Jake Nelson consultancy, there you go. That's just a tidbit of what you're going to get.
Our lawyers have advised me to say that my advice is only opinion, and that if you take my advice and fail, then that's really on you.
That is on you. Now, I was going to say that's about all we have time for on the show, but usually at this point, I go to wrap up the show, and you're like, oh no, there's something else. So I'm going to do it, and probably as a joke, you'll just let me wrap up the show. I don't know what way he's going to go. He's like a beast, like Enoch. He does what he wants. On that note, probably we should wrap up the show this week. And I would like to thank the boss, the man, the CEO of Jake Nelson Experience Enterprises, Jake Nelson. Jake, thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam.
And thank you, everybody, for listening. I'm now going to go outside. We're going to have a debrief. He may beat me. He may tell me off. I mean, I'm just held to ransom by how things have changed around here. But thank you very much for listening.
Look at me, Adam. I'm the captain now.
You are the captain now, and we will be back on the JNE the same time next week. But for now, from us, goodbye.
Goodbye.